the anime begins with a facility flooded by the repetitive sound of the emergency alarm and bright red lights that accompany a small boy who is walking calmly through the chaotic hallways without it seeming important that his surroundings were full of corpses of soldiers. At that moment, one of the surveillance cameras points directly at him. The little boy asks about someone's location since he seems to be looking for a girl named Saka. Further along the hallway, a high-security metal door opens at that moment, letting us see this girl being immobilized and threatened at gunpoint by another strange woman. Asaka does not understand what is happening since previously it seems that the woman promised her that she was not going to harm anyone. However, she is in a threatening tone. He forces her to shut up at that moment when the boy approaches the door happy to have found his friend, which surprises both girls since they clearly did not expect the boy to be there. Then when the boy's name is revealed to us, it is Yogiri who will be the protagonist of this impressive story. When the woman with the gun finds herself intimidated, she threatens the infante with killing her friend with one more step that he takes while he clearly writhes in pain, and upon seeing this, the little protagonist does not understand too much the situation he is in. Passing by, and in a single moment out of nowhere the woman is affected by a kind of psychic power that makes her fall lifeless at that very moment. Asaka, very bewildered, still does not know anything about what just happened, but the protagonist approaches her to hug her and asking them to return home in front of the child's happy face. Then girl cannot help but also smile warmly. A few seconds later, the woman's face changes, revealing now a young girl who is trying to wake up the protagonist, who is now a few years older. For a few brief seconds, the protagonist, still half asleep, does not know who she is until the young woman reminds him that her name is Tomochika and is very angry. She asks him how he can be sleeping in a situation like that at that moment when it is revealed to us that they were going on the bus until they were attacked by a monster that slaughtered to all the passengers except the two of them. When they look through the windows clearly they see a huge reptile. The protagonist at that moment he grabs a microphone that is on the floor and throws it strongly against the tail of the beast who was impaling one of his companions, causing it to separate from the vehicle. So after doubting what kind of monster was attacking them, upon paying more attention to it, they realize that it is a gigantic wibber, which, enraged by the blow, decides to attack the ENV bus again, dressing it with large flames coming out of. Tomochika quickly hugs the protagonist, thinking that this is the end of him, but when he notices the girl's breasts on his arm, he realizes that he cannot stay doing absolutely nothing, so looking seriously at the monster we see how a hole opens, a kind of psychic door in her mind, which causes the protagonist's eyes to light up to make him whisper a die, instantly knocking down the creature as the danger passes. The girl does not understand what has just happened to what the protagonist tells her. Answer that he doesn't know very well what just happened, but as if he didn't care in the slightest, he takes out his console and starts playing a few games, which makes the girl very angry. However, he continues with his video games trying to kill the dragon from Minecraft, but clearly this is a joke on my part. But we continue with the anime, which we see is about knights fighting dragons in the purest medieval style. Tomochika asks him if he wouldn't want to get out of the vehicle, to which the protagonist answers no, there is a guarantee that they are clearly safe if they go out, in addition to the fact that they would not know what to do. The young woman tells him that his attitude is very calm and serene and that he is very well, but it would be much better if he did not say it while playing. So clearly he turns off the console, and after seeing the girl was already feeling calmer, she asks him what happened while he was sleeping. She explains that they were on the bus heading to their new excursion on the other side of the tunnel. However, that is when we can see for some strange reason that they went through a kind of mystical tunnel that united the human world into the magical world, since they entered the tunnel at night and came out on the other side during the day. This caused a great impact on the students when they saw that they had arrived at a large sunny stop, since they clearly could not find an explanation for what is happening until suddenly at the front of the bus a girl stands up and introduces herself as the wise Shone. The very confused teacher asks her who she is, leaving us. Of course she does not belong to that class. but in a single moment the girl raising her hand and revealing a powerful blue illo that ends with the life of the man who falls before her at the moment, and after this act she asks all the students to concentrate only on her who are very terrified by what happened. Cheyenne explains that she has no intention of causing harm to anyone, but she will not be able to guarantee her safety if they make her angry or disobey her, since her attack power is clearly 530,000. Seeing the seriousness of the people, including the bus driver, she gets angry because she thinks they should laugh at what she said. So again raising his hand and making it shine, he takes the life of the driver of the vehicle, since he clearly did not laugh at his joke. Since his joke had failed, this made them angry. Sequence: he killed the man. All the students, they are still speechless at the immense feeling of terror that they feel at that moment. So upon seeing this, Cheyenne begins to explain that they have traveled to another new world for them, since she has summoned them all there because they are all future sages. She also explains that that world is governed by the wise, so from time to time it is necessary to replace their numbers. While explaining all this, he raised one of his hands, making it shine, which at first scared everyone since they thought that someone else was going to die. However, the shine was different from that of the twice before. Tomochika does not understand why she is not shining like the others, but is ignored by the wise woman, who continues explaining that she installed a system called Battle Song that was on all of them, making them see some kind of texts in front of them as if they were in a video game. Tomo girl asks her partner if she can see something, to which he answers that she has seen some strange texts that she is not able to understand, but they seem to be her statistics in her class. Cheyenne says that this system in this world is called gift. So if they don't take advantage of it and aspire to become wise, since they will have a month's time, the girl raises her hand and asks why she didn't shine and why she doesn't see any text or statistics of any kind, to which she answers yes. There are people who are not good for, so he should just surrender, and after this he starts to think about whether he should turn her into a fool who is drained of all his magic. A few seconds later he warns the rest that his first mission will begin in approximately an hour, whose objective will be not to be finally annihilated. After saying with these words, she leaves as a somewhat disoriented girl sits down again, and her friend explains to her that this was clearly what the next mission consisted of. She will be attacked by a level 1000 dragon, since the favorite dish of these creatures is humans, too. He advises them that leaving the bus without any strategy will definitely lead to an attack. He also explains that due to their current levels they would not be able to defeat such a dragon, so the bus will be safe because it is clearly protected by a mystical barrier until it begins the mission. So you must think of a game plan before acting. Among all the commotion, a boy called Yogiri stands up, and we are told that he has the general ability, which consists of having the leadership capacity to bring together a large group of people towards a single objective and act accordingly. He starts talking with the rest about the statistics of each one, having a great variety of techniques and skills, while the rest devised a plan. This, just like a young man named Yuichiro, is finally bringing his attention to the protagonist, who at that moment would be sleeping like a baby. So we are told in detail that the boy is almost always sleeping. A few seconds later the bus doors open and the rest of the students with powers begin to get off, something that angers those who clearly have not had that luck. However, they decide to follow him. So they try to wake up the protagonist, but it turns out to be useless. Their guru asks them to stay there since they will only hinder them by not having any power or abilities to then show off to one of its powerful forces, physical abilities, tearing off the seats without much effort. For the blessing, they have that degree of improved physical capacity even at level 1. Ayaka tells him that having this power would precisely mean that they can protect them, but the general answers that leaving them there is a strategy, giving way to his companion, who explain it. This one is called Azua, which has the ability to be a beauty coordinator that specializes its wearer in retouching by increasing and decreasing the attractiveness of an object to use aggressiveness management, making everyone now radiate a ridiculously attractive aura for the user dragon, and for the dragon to focus on them while everyone else can safely reach the city. This bitterly surprises Tomochika, who realizes that everyone agreed with this strategy, therefore they did not care in the least, watching that even their bathtub betrayed them to survive. Having said this, their guru and Azua get off the bus and lock them up so that the rest cannot get out, which greatly enrages those inside until they suddenly hear the sound of beating of large ones. wings, and out of nowhere a powerful blow crashes into the vehicle, killing Yaka. That's when the explanation ends up seeing how Yairo is also vanished, and all this while the protagonist slept peacefully like a baby, as if he didn't care about anything the girl I had just told him. He is only worried thinking about how he is supposed to be able to charge his console in another world, something that makes Tom very angry at that moment. The protagonist gets up thinking that if what his Guro said was true, he should just have a dragon, so on the outside should be pretty safe at this point. That's when the young woman asks him if he did something to make the dragon die. But he jokes that they probably crashed and are now dead, so they went and fell, and after getting out of the bus the protagonist realizes that they have three options: go to the hill, to the city, or maybe to the forest. I take the girl, interrupting the protagonist, and tells him something that she is clearly flying there. First, she thinks that it is a dragon, but when she looks more closely, she realizes that there are three companions of their class called Higashida, Fukuhara, and Anawaka, so the protagonist asks his new friend if they should kill them, but she asks him why they would do that, to which he answers that they clearly abandoned them there, and that is something a murderer would do, and then tell them that, although they have no intention of killing them, perhaps their companions do act in a hostile manner. Before landing, these three realize that the dragon is dead, and when they see that there are several survivors, they are very surprised. That's when the situation begins, which had the healing power, reveals that he wanted to turn Tomochika's corpse into a zombie. Yashida, who had the ability of a hero, being an offensive all-rounder and also a defensive one with the ability to equip all weapons and use basic magic, he answers that from at first they told her that there was a possibility that they would survive, and finally Fukua was the third of them, and that she had the power of necromancy, being able to turn the deceased into zombies under her control. She says that transforming her into a zombie and controlling her would be something quite creepy. After these words, Tomochika realizes that they clearly could not be friends with someone like that, and they whisper it to the protagonist. At that moment Higashida throws a powerful fireball a few centimeters from the protagonist and his friend, and explains that since he can only use magic, basic was being perfected with not very pleasant intentions. The protagonist in this situation decides to put himself in an advantageous point so that they do not continue to bother them. Looking at the hero, he points at them and tells him to die, which makes the rest laugh as they make fun of him, thinking that everything is an absurd way to scare them. However, the laughter ends. Suddenly, when their partner falls to the ground, they begin to get scared because they do not understand what just happened. That's when the protagonist tells him that he simply told him that dies, and that's what he's done, so if you don't want to be next, it's better that you don't move. Ignoring these words, Fukara quickly tries to help his friend by disobeying the protagonist's order, which also kills him. Anawaka, who was the last one, is shocked by the protagonist's words. So he begins to explain his ability and asks him to really confirm if they are clearly dead, since this time if he moves it won't kill him. So he obeys, and seeing that they do not move, he tries to use his healing powers since he could heal any wound in the world. However, this is useless since it is really now confirmed that he is so dead. He is. Then when Tomochika understands what happened to the dragon, full of rage, Inakawa tells him that they went too far this time, but the protagonist answers that he only returned the attack that they hit first, and after them he continues explaining his ability, which is called instant death, and affects any target he attacks. Simply, if he thinks he wants to kill someone, dies immediately, which seems absurd to the senator since he does not believe that something like this is possible or that it exists. So the protagonist offers to demonstrate it a third time in case it was not clear enough, but he is really scared and apologizes and tries to approach him with the intention of attacking him. Surprise, but he is quickly stopped by the protagonist, who discovers it since he also has the ability to determine if there is an intention to kill directed towards him. So, when he combines these two abilities, it is also possible for him to die just because he had the intention to kill him, which makes him abandon any attempt to kill him. The protagonist asks him why they believe so much after having received their powers, to which the boy explains that it is not the first time they have traveled in that world since it has not been long since the king's magician imagined them. Invited to defeat the Demon King, the protagonist interrupts him suddenly, understanding that the three of them ventured into that world for years. The moment arrives when they defeated the Demon King and were returned to the original world, which bothers the healer since the protagonist summarized his entire story in a short sentence. This strange event affected Chika since the boys did not miss class, so the healer explains that when they returned home, only a few hours had passed. This makes the protagonist understand that there is a possibility that he could also return to his world and threatens Aguaka by raising his hand since he wants to get rid of the possible future problems. The boy kneels before him and asks for mercy since he does not want to die, asking Tom to convince the girl. She answers that thanks to him, she has been able to survive, so she does not believe she can have an opinion on this. The girl's words really make Nakava nervous, and from his uniform, he takes out an ultra-rare magical object, a necklace that turns anyone who puts it on into a servant. He quickly hooks it around his neck and puts himself under the orders of Tomochika, who asks him to leave. After this order, the collar tightens, suffocating the boy so that he clearly follows her orders. The young woman is really upset with this and asks if there is any way to stop being his master, to which she replies that she can transfer this power to another person. So, without thinking about it, she transfers it to the protagonist, which really bothers the healer since he wanted to be the girl's slave. Finally, the protagonist agrees not to kill him, but in exchange, he must stay waiting in the forest full of magical beasts. Even though he initially refuses, the pendant makes him obey, choking him while making his legs move on their own before leaving. The protagonist tells him not to talk about them to anyone else and asks him to leave anything of value he has. After this, Inakua heads toward the forest, leaving enormous treasures behind. This prompts a conversation about how they could be betrayed at any moment, which makes the girl ask if he is not afraid that she will betray him. However, he answers that if it has to happen, it will happen, but he is the one choosing to protect her by his own decision. The girl, really blushing, asks him why he does so much to protect her if they had never spoken before. The boy doesn't know how to answer at first, but, after thinking about it, he realizes it is because when the dragon attacked them, she grabbed him, and he noticed her breasts were very soft. This makes the girl blush with shame, shouting that there are no good men in this world other than her piña colada. Sad, but the anime continues. On the other hand, in a gigantic floating palace under the brightness of 2 moons, Cheyenne happily hugs a pillow on her bed until a boy named Iki appears in her room to give her a report on what happened with the new possible sages. She tells him she discovered that the dragon died somehow and asks him what happened next. The boy explains that the first mission was completed successfully, but there were 4 fatalities. This calms the girl as she realizes that the 4 people without abilities were quickly abandoned. However, when he explains who died, she learns that the murderers were 2 people without abilities, and 2 chosen ones of rank S died suddenly and without warning. This surprises Ion, who quickly concludes that it could be instant death magic. Sabas is surprised that the system has failed but suggests it might not be worth worrying about. However, the boy insists they should be cautious, so Cheyenne tells him he can do what he considers necessary. He obeys and leaves, leaving the girl laughing with happiness. Several days later, at sunset, the protagonist, along with Tom and the girl, manage to reach the city. However, they see that the soldiers are already closing the gates, as they must be shut at night to protect citizens from threats such as wild animals or possible enemy invasions. The young woman grabs the protagonist by the arm, and they run toward the entrance, where they ask the guards if they can enter. The guards tell them no, which saddens the girl. A while later, as they wait by the wall, a young man approaches them accompanied by 2 soldiers. This boy's name is Masao, who is somewhat upset that they went separately from the group that arrived at noon, thinking they might be companions of those who abandoned them. They manage to deceive him by pretending to be members of the group of wise candidates. The boy then tells them they should be charged a toll too. They are allowed to enter the city, however, they are told not to stand in the way of the chosen ones. For this time, they are allowed to pass into the city. The boy, Masao, mentions that his team had the intention of going to the capital. They ask him for directions on how to get there, and Masao, somewhat arrogantly, responds that while he was told not to get in their way, he was not told he should help them. Hearing this, they thank him and try to leave, but the boy quickly suggests that the girl could stay in his mansion that night. This makes the girl very uncomfortable, but she thanks him and refuses, grabbing the protagonist by the hand and running away from the place. When they reach a quieter area, the protagonist asks her why she did that, to which she replies that she was afraid Masao might try to harm or kill him. The protagonist jokingly asks if she thinks he is a serial killer. She answers affirmatively, referencing his actions up to that point, noting how the protagonist has killed creatures and people. As they walk through the city, Tom is amazed by the beautiful appearance of the place, thinking it feels like a fantasy world, especially seeing beast people among the inhabitants. At that moment, a beast girl named Maru approaches them, welcoming them and quickly noticing it is their first time in the city. Tomochika is surprised by Maru's cat ears, and the beast girl continues offering her help insistently, which makes them feel a little strange since they don't understand why she is so eager to assist them. Maru explains that she wants to get along with the wise candidates because they have promising futures and are easy to seduce. Her blunt sincerity bothers Tomochika, who protests, but Maru reassures her that she doesn't plan to seduce someone who already has a girlfriend. This forces the protagonist to explain that they are not a couple. After a brief moment of embarrassment, the protagonist asks Tomochika what she thinks they should do. She responds that she would like to explore the city before nightfall. Finally, they accept the help of the beast girl. A couple of hours later, they have gone shopping, acquiring weapons, clothing, and supplies. However, their calm is interrupted when a group of bandits surrounds them, as Maru had betrayed and deceived them. This does not surprise the protagonist too much. The leader of the assailants declares that while they intend to steal all their possessions, their real targets are not the sage candidates like them, who clearly lack talent. The bandits seem to harbor deep resentment toward the gifted ones, as those with powers often go crazy in the city and cause chaos. To cope with the frustration this brings, the bandits target ordinary people like them. Since they also reach a high price and are much easier to attack due to not having good powers to defend themselves. Tom Girl is really scared, however, the protagonist clearly gives off a superhuman calmness and tells him that in that case he will be forced to kill him. Upon hearing this, the bandits mock him by telling him that they will not kill him but that, music, you will want words, they do not lie, saying that they have no chance against him. However, Mirio thinks that this is a lie to try to scare him since two weak people without the blessing of the wise cannot do anything no matter how hard they try. That is when the protagonist demonstrates his powers by asking everyone behind them to die annihilated without no problem. This causes the leader of the bandits to be overcome with deep terror as he does not know what just happened. This is when the protagonist decides to put his skills into practice, trying only to select and target specific parts of the body of his enemies, seeing if he can leave someone half dead without completely killing him or breaking specific areas. So we could say that the protagonist, who is a child, is quite insane for thinking about these things as crazy as the ankles or arms or eyes among others, but it is useless since it ends with everyone's life except one. However, despite trying to contain himself and seeing that it doesn't work, he thinks that killing individual parts is not enough. In addition, he doesn't like the feeling of torturing others on purpose, all this under the frightened gaze of his enemies. Those who do not understand the kind of monster that is to have such power is then when Maru with tears in her eyes begs for mercy, saying that her hungry little brothers are waiting for her to return home, but the protagonist tells her that that does not mean that robbing and selling people is okay, and after this he asks them to die. However, it seems that this has no effect, but taking advantage of the opportunity they decide to run away in terror. The girl asks him why he let them go, to which the portal answers that he didn't, and Maru, after getting on to a roof to get safe, she is affected by the power of the protagonist, dying with her companion. That's when the protagonist and her friend decide to leave, but at that moment they are stopped by some gentlemen, among whom two named Jorge and the one from the guards stand out. They want to question him about what just happened. The protagonist answers that they got lost in the city and they found them like that, while Tomochika thinks that it is the worst excuse that anyone could have come up with. The Deld quickly discovers his lie since they saw how the bandits they suddenly fell when they were about to attack him, which makes Tomochika very angry because he doesn't understand why. If they were watching, they didn't help them, to which the gentleman responds that they wanted to track down those who were going to sell them in order to put an end to the illegal trafficking. of wise men, and after them they warn them not to try anything strange, since the guards like them have the protection of the wise men, so they will not be affected by the gifts. Their partner, who is analyzing the protagonist with his powers, and her friend informs that they do not have any kind of skill, which surprises the girl when she sees that it would be practically impossible for them to have been able to do something like that, so this angers the captain and she decides to leave. Jorge apologizes to the protagonist and to Tom, the girl, who asks him if they could show them somewhere to they spend the night just before leaving, when they realize that one of the bandits is still alive and in the inn. The girl is surprised by how incredible that place is. While the protagonist is checking in, they ask him if he wants to share a room, which he does. Blushes the girl, saying maybe it's a bit hasty for this, so he orders a room next to the other. When he gets to the room, Tomochika is surprised by how big it is and that it's clearly only for one person, while he thinks nervously and embarrassedly. What would the protagonist be thinking? When she talks about sharing a room, realizing that this will be the first time in this world that they are totally alone, or that she is not next to the protagonist, she wonders if the boy will like it. But quickly, remembering that her interest was her breasts, she tries to think about something else. At that moment a burst of air surprises the girl, who when she looks up sees a somewhat plump spirit woman and quickly realizes that she has a lot of resemblance to her sister, which angers the spirit since she does not want to be associated with her, and she introduces herself as Mokomoko, the restorer of the school, and the guardian of the family, Dan Nura, that is, her ancestor and guardian spirit. This surprises the girl a little, and the spirit answers that due to this situation, which is clearly an emergency, he has appeared to help her, which makes Tomochika very angry since he thinks that if he really came to help her, he would have appeared when the bandits attacked them, or for example when they were almost on the verge of being killed by the dragon, but Mokomoko tells him that the protagonist should appear recklessly. Could erase it since its ability would work even with spirits. Here in this part we realize that the protagonist is really very, very powerful. After this the ghost asks him to talk to her the next day so that she is safe if appears, and after continuing the conversation, Mokomoko tells her that due to her spirit condition she can protect her from any physical attack, and she is the one who prevented the installation of the GIF when she saw that it was her fault that she couldn't have it by proxy. Now Tom girl gets angry. But the ghost justifies himself by asking her if she would really want something so suspicious to be put on her, explaining to her that although it is true that it has some advantages when you accept this power, the sap takes over your life. This makes the young woman ask him the reason why the rest of people not they got a power, trying to find out if they are being protected by something like a spirit just like her. However, the ghost tells her that she doesn't know the details, it belongs to the others. However, now that she is here, it is her wish to return to the successor of Anura's archery school, a mixed martial art that has been practiced since the Yin period. Tomochika confesses that he would love to return to his world, but all he can do now is trust the protagonist. The ghost tells him that is the reason not precise why he will personally teach her the true art of his school, so the conversation continued at length. The next day in the morning, the protagonist notices that his partner seems very tired and asks her if she couldn't sleep, to which she responds in kind, which was complicated after everything that happened the night before. Changing the conversation a little, he asks if after this they will catch up with the rest of the group. Then when a woman with pink hair and a rather extravagant outfit introduces herself as a matchmaker who clearly is the hotel concierge, the protagonist explains to his companion that the woman was looking for the location of her companions and how to get to them. In addition, she was also preparing elements for language translation and status concealment, thus creating even a charger for her portable device. The concierge gives them some tickets train to access the capital, so the protagonist thanks her and then asks her if she can keep his treasures, giving him the backpack full of jewels and gold. Although at first the girl thinks that it is too much burden for a janitor, the woman agrees without problem, demonstrating his professionalism, which is surprising. The girl realizes that she has solved all her problems in no time after a few hours. Already on top of the train heading to the capital, we see how Tom, the girl, has to turn the crank of the charger while she is buried in the stomach of the ghost. The writing says that it doesn't take up any physical space, so there's no need to worry about it, and after talking a little about the abilities of the ghosts, Tomochika asks the protagonist if he's able to see the spirit, and he doesn't stop playing with the console. He answers that he could only begin seeing her once he clearly told her about her. That's when they start talking about her companions, since Celestina informed her that she suspects that her companions moved through the primeval forest to clearly train their skills, which greatly surprises the girl since she does not understand. How can the woman know so much about this whole subject in an instant? The protagonist pounces on girl, throwing her to the ground just so that a second later the train has split in half horizontally. Meanwhile, in a kind of medieval church we see like that of the garden Jorge and Masao, they have tied up one of the bandits from the previous night in front of a very mysterious red-haired woman. The bandit screamed and begged for the help of his boss and also that of Mayu because he was really scared. Jorge explains that despite having tried healing magic in him, his eyes recovered from the physical injuries. However, he still continues without being able to see anything. The red-haired woman, upon seeing this, inserting her fingers into the bandit's eye sockets, tears out his eye, making him scream in pain, and then heals him with a spell. Creating a new eye, however, he was unable to recover his sight in any way. Then when it is revealed to us that the woman with red hair is called Lain, who turns out to be a vampire who, seeing that it would clearly be impossible to recover his sight, the thief decides to suck him. Blood also tells us that his class is Origin Blood, the highest rank of clearly the undead, which allows him to introduce someone to his lineage after biting him, giving him a significant improvement in his physical capabilities. However, despite all efforts and the notable improvement in power, the bandit was also unable to recover his vision out of nowhere. Everything begins to shake and debris begins to fall from the ceiling as if the IO suddenly began to collapse. Edelgard reacts quickly, pounces on Jorge to prevent him from being crushed by the rocks and dying in that moment. They see a mysterious boy appear at the door with the class of a hero back on the train. The alarm voice alerts about a wise man who has started a confrontation with an aggressor in the vicinity. The protein thinks that they are clearly after them while his friend she is still bewildered. She is surprised to see a gigantic white robot in the distance, realizing that this is the aggressor, which is much larger than the wise man, who can barely be noticed in the sky. The confrontation between the two is impressive due to the enormous speed of both and their enormous destructive power, since they are even capable of breaking mountains with their attacks. The robot shoots at the hero and he dodges it without too many complications. Meanwhile, in the distance, Tomochika asks the protagonist why he gets rid of them as they are clearly in his way, to which he asks if he really wants him to kill every person who crosses his path, so they should set some rules, as otherwise he would end up killing anyone who bothers him. There, when the girl realizes the mistake she has made and apologizes for having been naive during the conversation, the battle between both enemies continues until the robot finally ends up approaching the protagonist and his partner. The hero, who clearly had the name Saru, is angry with the robot because it doesn't stop fleeing. So it launches a powerful ice attack to stop it. The protagonist manages to pounce next to the girl on the ground, but the rest of the innocent people around end up being frozen, which surprises Machika since he doesn't understand the meaning. Why is he hurting the innocent as if he didn't care? On the other hand, in the church, the other hero attacked Lain, cutting him repeatedly. However, it seemed to have no effect on him, to the surprise of his companions who could not understand the resistance of the women. But Jorge quickly realizes that it did not matter the damage that Lain clearly received, since he was healed instantly. The vampire asks him why, if a hero attacks a wise man and not the demon king and the boy whose name was Ain, he answers that he cannot forgive his tyranny. So he will eradicate all the wise men from this world and then explode his sacred sword with a great explosion of light, destroying the entire building. When the smoke from the explosion dissipated, panting tiredly, the protagonist is happy to have finally defeated a wise man and dedicates these words to a certain Ariel. Back on the train, the protagonist and Tomochika realize the cruelty of the hero and ask him why he attacked them if they had nothing to do with him. See with this, to which he answers that clearly if you see a wise man it is his duty to kneel on the floor and wash it, saying that they are a nuisance. But the protagonist answers that the only nuisance there is the murderer at that moment. Upon completing this, the robot approaches NZ for peace, saying that he has no intention of fighting, while in the church Lain appears out of nowhere and asks the hero if Ariel is his lover's name, which surprises the boy who does not know. How could she dodge his attack? She answers that she didn't dodge it. So since she can't die anyway, moving is a hassle. The hero continues to refuse that the vampire could have resisted an attack like that, to which Lain answers that if she could fall in the face of such an attack, things would be much easier for her if she saw herself completely defeated. He asks the woman to kill him, but she simply answers that she doesn't feel like it. So she grabs him and throws him out of the tower as if he were a dirty rag, and after this asks Jorge and Delgar to track down the whereabouts of the protagonist, who at that moment was talking to the robot and had offered to give him anything he asked for. So the portal asks him if he knows how they can return to their world, but the robot says that he only knows the way to return to the world from which he comes. However, it is clearly not possible since his entire being is not present in this place, and equally he cannot take someone as dangerous as the protagonist to his world. After which he explains that in that world exists at the lowest level. So to go up, they would need coordinates and an enormous amount of energy. The protagonist decides to conclude his negotiations by receiving advice on how to find those two requirements. When night falls, Jorge and Durgat arrive at the site of the wrecked train and realize that the wise man was clearly dead on the ground. Meanwhile, in a floating house, Lain was with Shong talking about the murder of this wise man and the mysterious ability of the protagonist that would be instant death. Cheyenne then reveals that Santoro had resistance to instant death. Changing the subject, they discuss something called darkness, which are the aggressors that come from other worlds. They reach a pact in which Lain will be allowed to take care of the aspiring sages on the condition that she is willing to expel the darkness. After she accepts, Cheyenne happily leaves by teleporting at that moment. The vampire then calls a man nicknamed Masayuki, ordering him to take the immortal army to a place called Envusa, since the regular troops would have no chance to combat the threat they clearly face. Not caring that the city has been destroyed, back with the protagonist, they decide to take a break in the forest area, having separated from the aggressor because encountering him again could bring them problems. The spirit appears, creating a sword that it places on Tom's lap, explaining that it was made with the parts of the robot and can transform at will, camouflaging itself as part of her clothes. This makes the girl very angry. Hours later, already in the city, they see a civilization with a modern appearance similar to that of the human world. Tom, the excited girl, is happy to be so close to it, realizing that it looks like a traditional Japanese city from her world. When she sees the protagonist somewhat tired, she asks him if maybe he wouldn't want to hone his skills here, but he answers that it would make no sense since he simply kills any enemy that comes across him one after another without any type of difficulty. Showing her as an example, he points to all the demons and thieves who had gone after them, seeing numerous beasts lying on the ground. The girl tells him that even though he is right, they cannot just walk around carelessly because it would be something quite silly and dangerous on his part. The protagonist tells her that he is clearly very aware of it. However, he is completely calm about his mastery of his skills. Tomochika tries to convince him by saying that if his power ends up running out or has a limited number of uses per day, it could become problematic. At that moment, the protagonist turns to her and, with the calm gestures that characterize him, explains that really, getting tired is what allows him to use his powers as much as he wants. That's why he's always very sleepy. The girl reacts in surprise when she understands that she doesn't have any kind of limit to the use of her power. In the city, the girl looks in amazement at the buildings and the people walking around the street. Then, Mokomoko appears among the group to reveal that in the city, instead of stone walls like those in a castle, what protects the modern city is a kind of force field or magic barrier. The small group continues moving forward, looking at a map of the area until they reach their destination, which turns out to be a large hotel similar to one with skyscrapers. The protagonist tells his friend that Celestina had told him about it, since it would be the place they would take as a base for a while. These words make them happy, especially Tomochika, who quickly runs through the revolving door of the building, surprised to see the luxurious interior of the main lobby where the elegant and sophisticated decoration stands out. At that moment, a young man appears, recognizing the girl and being happy that she managed to get dressed safely and survive until then. This boy, whose name is Tachibana, was one of the members of her class, a fact that surprises Tomochika since she did not expect to find someone from her school there, as everyone should still be training in the primeval forest. the boy explains that he moves separately from the rest of the group, as he doesn't need to train with those who level up ineffectively. Tomochika doesn't understand why he is saying this, but before she can ask him, she is interrupted by a blonde woman who seems very angry at not knowing the girl, making it clear that she is obviously jealous of her when she sees that she is talking in a very friendly way with Tachibana, who is her master. The boy asks the young woman, whose name is Eric, to stop and not be so hostile towards a friend, explaining that they were classmates. Upon hearing this, the young woman steps back a little, obeying her master. This way of acting is quickly praised by another girl around her age, whose name is Stephanie. She congratulates Tachibana for having such a tolerant spirit, even when dealing with rude people, something worthy of a hero like him. The girl whispers to him that everything is quite strange since her new acquaintances are quite unusual. Then, Tachibana proceeds to introduce her bodyguards, 5 girls of apparently different ages. Eric, the only blonde, has the 5th rank and a rather arrogant personality. Stephanie, the youngest, kind-hearted and with the 4th rank, although she also dislikes her. The protagonist and his companions Chelsea, who was apparently the smallest of all and was holding a teddy bear, being the bodyguard of 3rd rank F. Mia, who was a woman with white hair and darker skin, had delusions about her own beauty and she had the 2nd rank. And finally, Laughed, who was the captain of the bodyguards, despite the fact that she also had a rather hostile behavior. She took the girl after the introductions and, somewhat annoyed by the girls' attitudes, asked them to stop being so unfriendly towards them, which makes Tachibana apologize since she's not good at being harsh with them. So she tells them to shut up a little. The protagonist, whispering, asks his classmate if Tachibana was one of the students who was left behind with them, warning him that he clearly does not know what kind of power he could have achieved in that world. However, he seems like someone quite sure of himself, to which Tomochika answers that he has always been like that, having the same attitude since he has always been popular with girls, which made him someone conceited, making the protagonist realize that high school is a much more interesting place than he thought before. After that, Tachibana tells the girl that finding her there is a kind of destiny and asks if she would like to be his lover. She asks, which obviously bothered her bodyguards who began to look at her angrily. These words left me stone cold. So the young man quickly realizes that perhaps he has been hasty in asking her for something like this so suddenly since yes, she would possibly be worried about the protagonist. So, even though she does not usually accept men in her group, since he was a classmate, perhaps she could take him as her servant to do him a favor, which made Tom a little uncomfortable because of the absurdity of it. However, for this very reason, the protagonist did not want to kill him, since it was obvious that the boy lacked common sense for miles. So when they ask him why he is so sure of this and what gives him so much confidence, that's when Tachibana reveals his ability, which is dominating, having the ability and power to control lower rank opponents as if they were slaves, making them obey him. These words make the girl think that his levels of conceit have surpassed themselves. However, he realized that he had not yet received much training since he should be weaker than the rest of his companions who were still training in the forest. Then, when Tachibana continues explaining how her abilities work, telling him what happened once they left the bus, that same night there was a victory party in the city where they arrived after passing the first mission. It was there when the other classmate, who was called Otori, approached him with the intention of giving him advice. This boy explained to him that his class was a consultant, which allowed them to analyze the skills and advise the rest to clearly solve problems or also improve skills. However, Tachibana still did not understand why he wanted to advise him or what exactly Otori told him. Since he was a dominator, everyone avoided him so that there would come a time when he would control them and put down his orders. The boy continued explaining that right now he did not have time to argue among his companions, since if wise men did not emerge, everyone would become cattle. Therefore, it would benefit him to help these appeared after this. He recommended the plan to follow. This consisted of buying a large number of weak level 1 servants since they would not be very expensive, with the intention that once they emerge victorious from the battles, the defeated enemies could become their servants, and his experience would also become his, thus leveling up passively, letting his slaves do the dirty work for him. Tachibana, somewhat confused, asks him how he knows this information if these types of details were not even explained in his skills. So he answers that the skills of a consultant also include knowing the hidden specifications of each user. Tachibana, somewhat confused, asks him why he takes the trouble to tell him, to which his partner answers again that they need several approaches to achieve getting a wise person, because if everyone used the same method, it would be suicidal behavior for them. So by giving advice to those who seem promising, they increase their chances of success. After hearing this story, Tomo girl realizes that there are too many support staff in this world, and the protagonist confirms that while he continues to increase his troops of subordinates, the boy's level will also increase. While he continues, they continue the conversation a little. Finally, Tachibana and his bodyguards leave, but not before reminding him of the proposal that he join their group. The protagonist advises his friend to go for Tachibana, since if they join forces, she may clearly be safer than with him. However, she refuses, and outside the city, we see a gigantic creature made of shadows advance with a lost gaze in front of her. The wise Lain observes and threatens, however, she thinks that the monster has no chance against her. Hours later, back at the hotel, the protagonist sleeps while Mokomoko wonders how much longer they can stay like this without doing anything. Mokomoko answers that until the protagonist wakes up. He reveals himself. 3 days have passed when the girl asks the spirit to wake him up, but she refuses for fear that he will accidentally end her life. Then when she decides to go out for air, but before leaving the room, she sees through the window several columns of smoke rising between the buildings of the city, and a group of vehicles advances along the road, creating chaos through the city. Within this were clearly followers of the IN, who formed the immortal body of the undead unit with the intention of turning as many people into zombies as possible at his mercy. Mokomoko quickly realizes this when she smells the stench of death, while Tomochika is not quite sure what is clearly happening. Suddenly in the hallway, we see a species joke of invisibility who seems to want to go unnoticed as she heads to the girl's room. After seeing what happened outside, Tomochika decides to change her mind about going out. A few seconds later, the spirit warns her that there is someone secretly watching with hostile intentions, however, she cannot see her. There, when the girl decides to wake up the protagonist by calling him on the phone in his room, the boy, who was sleeping, was dreaming of his childhood with his dog and comes out, who told him that breakfast was ready. Then, when the sound of the phone made him realize, he wakes up, and after listening to what Tom had to tell her, the girl decides to head toward her room. Then, after quickly leaving the hallway, she detects the aggressive presence of Erika, who is armed with a very large knife. So, she quickly uses her powers to kill her instantly. After this, she quickly notifies her partner that the hostility was directed towards her and, after notifying over the phone that there was someone collapsed in one of the hallways, she begins to talk about what happened. On the other hand, in a kind of dungeon, we see Tashiana clearly next to his bodyguards, who are alerted of Erika's death just before being attacked by a kind of insect man. The protagonist and his friend realize that the girl who wanted to attack them was from the Dominator's group, understanding that they will surely have to fight him. So, they should leave the hotel for the moment. The insect man attacked Tachibana but was quickly stopped by a force field that killed the creature and was then attacked by a firebomb. Having defeated the insect, the boy puts him under his control and they cure him by asking him the details of these ruins. Then, when he orders him to get more allies as he advances through the lower floors of these ruins, after that, the Dominator's group continues talking about the death of his companion. After observing the record, they realize that he died suddenly. Then, when Himiya continues with the hypothesis that Erika wants to take Tomochika to him to please him, or perhaps he was trying to get rid of her because he considered her unworthy, and after continuing to talk about this, he thinks that the protagonist, along with Tomochika, will now be trying to flee the place. So, he decides to send Risa and Chelsea to make sure he captures her outside the ruins. We see how the creature of darkness advances, and Lain tries to stop him by giving him a powerful punch that clearly goes through his head. However, the creature regenerates without problem and continues advancing as if nothing had happened in the direction of the dungeon. The protagonist stopped by Laughter, the leader of the bodyguards, who appears out of nowhere and freezes them with a spell. but the protagonist breaks the ice with a punch without much difficulty, which greatly surprises the woman. She explains that she only thought about killing the ice and that was how she was able to break it. She laughs, really surprised, and uses her cane to create a powerful ice projectile. But before she can throw it, the protagonist destroys it and then breaks the cane after showing her what he is capable of doing. The protagonist recommends that she not do anything strange if she doesn't want to die and asks her to answer his questions. She obeys, and the boy asks her if she can use magic without the staff, to which she answers that unfortunately, she cannot. Then, when the protagonist asks her another question, he seems to see if she has various staffs, but she also answers that she does not. Finally, he asks her if it was Tachibana who ordered her to try to kidnap Tomochika, and she answers yes. In the same way that the rest of the bodyguards were asked, at that moment, a black silhouette on the ceiling jumps in the direction of the girl, but he quickly uses a martial arts ki to knock her down at that moment, which surprises the protagonist, who did not have the knowledge of his friend who knew how to fight. Then, when Mokomoko informs him that he has finally begun to manifest the talent of his family, they quickly realize that what they had shot down was a kind of puppet and then notice that they are surrounded by these strange laughing dolls. Taking advantage of the commotion, she tries to do a dirty trick but is quickly killed by the protagonist with a single look. That is when it is revealed to us that Chelsea, the smallest of the bodyguards, had the ability to give life to her dolls, being a kind of puppeteer. Then we see how everyone is ordered to attack the girl with the intention of finishing her off at that moment. However, the boy uses his power of instant death in the area, causing all the dolls to collapse on the ground. Upon realizing this, the little girl is saddened by the feeling that those she considers her friends have died. When she sees that the protagonist and his companion were approaching her quickly, the girl went into shock, starting to cry, really terrified, begging them not to hurt her. Seeing that the girl was really harmless, he decided to ignore her. Tachibana, who was still in the ruins, quickly died laughing and discovered that Chelsea had lost the will to fight, giving them all the information. Then, when they discovered the power of the protagonist, it seems very implausible to them, so they decide to test him to find out more about these abilities by sending a gigantic army of cockroaches with the intention of surrounding the protagonist. Then, when we discover that Tomochika is afraid of insects and quickly asks him to kill them all, however, the protagonist tells her that if he did that, all the bugs would fall on them, which makes the young woman quickly change her decision. The protagonist continues explaining that it is not because they are insects, and harmless ones stopped being dangerous at that moment since they could obey Tachibana's orders and suffocate them by entering through their mouth. Therefore, they decided to advance calmly without making any strange movements. This makes the Dominator think that the protagonist cannot use the ability if they are clearly surrounding him, so he orders the insects to finish them off. The protagonist, realizing this, tells Tomochika that the quickest way to end this would be to kill Tachibana directly. This confuses the girl a little since she doesn't know how she would do something like that being so far away. However, the protagonist begins to follow the trail of the order to kill until he locates the Dominator and without much complication ends his life, surprising his friends. Tomochika's bodyguard thinks that he has failed since the insects were still there, but the protagonist explains that if Shyvana could reach them, they could reach Tachibana even though they had killed him. Finally, they decide to leave the building to get away from the cockroaches in the ruins. Stefan tries to cure the Dominator, however, it is useless since he is lifeless. Then, when Ima, having freed herself from the boy's control, decides to leave, but when she leaves, she quickly realizes that the ruins had disappeared, devastated by a gigantic creature made of shadows. It is then that she meets Lain, who quickly puts a spell on her and, with a bite, turns her into his follower so that the protagonist and Tomochika can give him all the information possible. They walk through an alley thinking that they should return to the capital. However, their conversation is quickly interrupted by screams of terror from the crowd, realizing that now the city seems to be immersed in a kind of zombie apocalypse led by the leader of the immortal core of the undead unit. Lain, now together with Yupam, were trying to stop the gigantic creature made of shadows and darkness while they talked about the protagonist's capabilities. The vampire was really interested in whether he would have enough power to, at some point, be able to kill even her, who was someone immortal. On the other hand, in the great city, the apocalypse was unleashed as a zombie invasion devastated everything at that time, attacking even innocent people. The girl was really surprised and did not understand why all this was happening. The protagonist analyzed the situation when he saw that the zombies were moving slowly. He saw a good and possible idea, which was to escape, moving cautiously. The girl asked him for help to save the people in the city. However, both he and Mokomoko thought that it was already too late and they should not worry about them, since it was very unlikely that they would be able to do something at this point, therefore they should leave immediately to ensure their safety. On the other hand, in one of the buildings in the city, a man who seemed to be in charge of managing the city, called Rakuti from Vampire Sap, talked to the leader of the undead organization, called Masayuki. It was there when the undead revealed that they both knew each other since they passed Lain's sage election test together, being two comrades who survived in the same battles. Ryuta, quite angry, realized that his partner had already died, becoming this. So after this, he ordered him to gather all his lifeless followers and then leave that place, but Masayuki replied that he acted this way under the orders of his teacher, therefore he could not disobey in any way. This greatly surprised Ryuta, who could not believe the words that came out of his mouth. However, the undead continued, this time asking him for the key to the city. To the discontent of the human, he had to obey but not without asking what objective they had in mind for such actions. But Auk, trying to avoid the question, refused to give him a specific reason, telling him that it was nothing important. After this, a message through the city's loudspeakers alerted the zombies to clearly stop at that moment. Without lives, they stood frozen in the sight under the terrified gaze of the citizens who were still surviving. Tomochika and the protagonist realized this while they were hiding in some bushes. Then, when the message over the loudspeakers continued, and after introducing himself to the people of the city, he reported that the followers of Lain and the commander of the Immortal Corps, who was looking for a boy called Yogiri and a young woman called Tomochika, quickly the screens of a building showed the photos of the protagonist and his companion, and the mission was given to all the citizens to take them to the central plaza in approximately an hour. They were not to care if they were brought alive or dead, since if they were not brought, the zombies would begin to move again, generating chaos and destroying what was left of the city. So fleeing would not make sense since the barrier that protected the interior of the city had been activated to clearly make it impossible for them to escape. The people, terrified by the message, did not know what to do other than feel helpless in the face of what had happened. Those who were alerted were the protagonist and Tomochika, who now knew that it was the clear objective of the villains. The message ended by making it clear to all the citizens that they only had two options: bring the objectives that were asking to become zombies. Ryota, indignant at Masayuki's words, reproaches him that in his agreement, he had not said anything about hurting people, to which the undead is honest with the boy, telling him that he is not really going to cause more chaos, but no. One would look for them just because now, being threatened with death, it was the most efficient and fastest way that his orders clearly suggested. A really furious Ryuta laments that his companion had no idea how hard he fought to bring the city to this point of prosperity. Back on the streets, it was now the citizens who were a danger since they were looking for them with the intention of saving their loved ones' lives, becoming even more dangerous than the zombies. The protagonist, aware of what happened, thought that they had no choice but to run so they wouldn't be found since now they couldn't even use the train for now. As a really confused girl, she did not understand why they were chasing him like this, to which the protagonist thought that perhaps it was because they killed a wise man. So, killing another without perhaps thinking that it had its disadvantages. At that time, they were discovered by three men who quickly set out to catch them, without caring about hurting them in the process. The protagonist, upon hearing this, threatened them, telling them that if they came a little closer, he would kill them right there. This did not seem to faze the citizens much, as they were not afraid and could not afford to stop and fight. Then, when one of them, who was carrying an axe, launched himself at the protagonist, he died instantly the moment the protagonist activated his powers, causing him to fall lifeless on the ground. This totally scared the other two, but especially Tomochika, who, at the end of the day, had seen the protagonist kill an innocent person, being the first time she had seen such a horrible way to keep a promise. The protagonist reminded her that in moments like this, they couldn't afford to be sensitive, since the citizens were trying to attack them to kill them. However, it was strange that they thought they wouldn't be killed. It was at that moment when the protagonist fell on a slope, on something that could be of relative importance, since it seemed that he was now trying to investigate who they could and could not kill, something that bothered him a little, and he decided to take charges against them. Masayuki was trying to discover the essence of his powers. The other two men ran away very scared as soon as they witnessed this, and the protagonist thought that perhaps they could negotiate directly with him. They left on their own feet to the square. Upon arriving there, we see that everything in a radius of a few meters was withered, leaving a mountain of skulls bathed in a purple atmosphere, symbolizing the rot to death. The spirits that wandered lost shook the area in a horrifying dance until now, when they arrived at the place where the group of undead was waiting for them, the protagonist revealed that he was looking for the leader, but Masayuki was really surprised. He didn't expect that they themselves would come to the place on their own foot, thinking that this was really something boring, since he did not understand why they were trying to sacrifice themselves for the people of the city without fighting in the attempt or hiding to hinder their home. It was then when the protagonist told him that he did not have the intention to sacrifice himself for anyone in this city, but Tomochika asked him to be a little more empathetic in this situation. The conversation continued, and Masayuki asked him what he wanted, then, since if he killed them in that place, his life would have ended. The protagonist reveals that his goal was to get on the train to head to the royal capital, so he calmly asked him if he could remove the city barrier so that they could use the station. Because of the seriousness of the boy, the undead was surprised since he didn't seem to show any hint of fear or exultation. This began to enrage him, as he thought that they were making fun of him, reminding them that this is not an option to ask for favors of any kind. The protagonist realized that his words were right, therefore they would need something that they could offer in exchange. He proposed to let him live, even though he was an idiot. This infuriated Masayuki even more, who threatened him by telling him that he could kill him at that very moment and ordered his entourage to attack them. The fight began, sending them toward an army of spirits and the undead, explaining that there was no way he could kill the living dead and the deceased while they laughed frantically like madmen. At that moment, with great difficulty, the protagonist asked the creatures to die by making them fall, immediately reducing them to skin, bones, and old devices. This scared both Masayuki and Ryuta, who quickly informed the protagonist and his friend that he was the feudal lord who ruled this area and had absolutely nothing to do with this incident while saying these words. The furious undead did not understand how they could have died alone without lives, since that would be something that did not make sense. The protagonist answered that he didn't understand why their powers worked this way, but although Masayuki had previously told them that they were dead if they kept moving, it meant that they were alive in some way. The girl, somewhat surprised by the simplicity of the protagonist, realized that he had ignored this factor at all times. The undead continued, saying that this was something absurd since he did not understand how it could be done, killing something that is already dead. To which the protagonist answered that he is the one who decides if it is dead or not, since if they move, then for him, they are alive, and they stop when they die regardless of what they think about it. Masayuki quickly cursed the sky and Len's name, since he surely already knew about this information and used him as simple guinea pigs. The protagonist continues talking, telling him that all his allies are now dead, so he asks him what his next move will be. Masayuki quickly realizes that the protagonist has an instant death ability. So it was then that a kind of metamorphosis began, in which he began to transform into something similar to a werewolf, or perhaps rather a Batman, since gigantic wings emerged from his back. However, before to allow you to complete his transformation, the protagonist killed very quickly, making Tomochika remind him that he should not break the main rule of the anime, which is to stand by and do nothing while the villain transforms into a more powerful superversion. The protagonist answers why he would wait to someone like him, to which the girl reminds him that they should negotiate since they would not know how to deactivate the barrier in this case, but the boy seems to have no problem with this, turning towards Ryuta, who agrees with him while begging him that he does not kill him since he does not plan to do anything bad to the two, since he is the one in charge of the city and he does not want it to receive more damage. Then when the protagonist confesses that he only acts this way to protect himself, Upon hearing this, the mayor reveals that Lain the wise woman ordered Masayuki to end their lives. This surprises Tomochika a little since she thought that the name of the wise woman was Shaun. Then when a man explains that Shaun is also a wise woman, but this city and its surroundings are under control of Lain, so as his subordinate he was obliged to take care of this area. This surprises the girl, who explains that it was Shaun who called them to this world and told them to become wise, and that is why she does not understand how it is possible that this once a different sage wants them to be killed. The man confesses that he had not heard anything about this. However, interfering with the sage candidates was not something he was usually used to doing. Then when Mokomoko goes to the protagonist to inform him that there was a type of spiritual manipulation heading towards that area, however, although they were protecting themselves from the attacks directed towards them, this murderous intent came from all directions, pointing towards the square in which they were at that moment. It is then that they see that the citizens surrounded by a kind of dark aura they had there, which surprises him. Since this time they are not zombies, he riots. Without thinking twice when he understands that they are using spiritual magic, I decide to use the city barrier since these would keep them safe in stealing the key to the city. City of Masayuki's corpse tries to activate it to unfortunately realize that for some strange reason it does not work. Coming to the conclusion that Lain herself could be directly manipulating the barrier from afar, the sap along with Yupio were bewitching the area, to which the new Viente explained to her that this method was extremely dangerous since even Tachibana was murdered when the protagonist detected her hostility from a distance. So perhaps it could be the same on this occasion. Then the woman asked her companion a question, really asking him what so threatening did she think the protagonist was. She replied that he could be above a wise man, a master of the sword, or even mythical beings, so he considered that it was best not to get involved with him. Lain considered this as a proposition of Wea. However, he was not in a position to simply run away while he thought that his new servant, despite knowing his abilities, was really worried about his safety, letting him see how extremely dangerous the protagonist could be since he was surely a formidable opponent. Then when we can witness that the creature made of darkness was heading towards a civilization, on the other hand, the protagonist's group was already surrounded by citizens who, with spears, bats and tools, were heading towards them. Tom Girl reminds the protagonist that it is not the citizens' fault to attack them since these are under mental control, and he asks if he could directly attack the source of the manipulation, but the protagonist tells him that it is a different case from Tachibana since in his case he was linked through his servants at that time when the citizens began one by one to balance about the boy trying to kill him, so he did not hold back and began to kill everyone who approached, realizing that the attack patterns were really strange, as if they were being tested in some way. However, they had already experienced something like this before since there was a boy who tried many things to see what he could do to them. Tom, the girl, told him that this seemed to have no end since more and more always appeared, so I wouldn't know what the boy could do at this moment. He reveals that if he wanted he could end it. That was done very quickly, but because Ryota found it really difficult to see ordinary citizens die before his eyes, he was holding back as much as possible so as not to murder as many people as possible. After this, the protagonist asked the mayor to come closer. Little more to them back with the wise woman. This confirms that the darkness is going to enter the city, therefore now was a good time to kill them, since if they could not do it directly then it would be from a distance with an involuntary killing causing towards an event which would result in death of everyone in the area at that time. The vampire had fun extracting a potion from her soul, explaining that even if her main body was reduced to ashes, she had a restoration ability that could revive her instantly, making there no problems if he used it by asking his clone to go up to the sky and increase its number as many times as he thought appropriate. This obeyed and began to multiply again and again. The protagonist quickly asked his companions to be careful since he noticed how the hospitality suddenly increased. Then when Tomochika saw that the gigantic creature made of riotous darkness was looming between the buildings, it was then that he discovered the reason why Lain was nearby, since he surely had to see that mysterious monster in his path. Everything that came into contact with him was reduced to nothing, becoming particles of dust. Everyone there realized that the being was getting closer and closer. Lain then explains that his copies do not have the memory of the protagonist, Therefore it was impossible for him to had an intention to kill him, so what happens from now on would simply be a natural disaster. Is so when he orders his clones to head to the city quickly if the creature made of shadows showed any strange behavior such as moving to attack or otherwise dying of suddenly. Tomochika asked the protagonist if he could somehow also kill this creature, to which the protagonist answered yes, which surprised both the girl and the mayor since they did not imagine that his abilities could reach such a point yet. Thus, the protagonist had a bad feeling, but he could not allow everything to be like this, so he decided to kill the creature. As soon as he achieved it, he realized that some red lights were beginning to rain from the sky. So he asked for body to ground, realizing that which was something totally external to the creature, and after analyzing what happened, Tomochika reveals that in the lights he can see a woman in a red dress descending from the sky in hordes. Upon hearing this, Ryota quickly identified the woman as the wise Lain, so he did not understood the why was he acting this way. Tomochika asked the protagonist if he could somehow do something, but he told him that unfortunately not, since he could not react based on hostility because it was not directed towards him as they were moving at such a speed. They couldn't reach them quickly either, being a perfect countermeasure against him. Upon realizing that there were many, the mayor explained that perhaps the vampire divided herself, since due to her ability to regenerate, she could even easily want copies of herself. Upon hearing this, the protagonist understood that then yes, I could affect him, although it would be easier if he targeted it directly. Is then when Ryota reveals his ability as mayor, which allows him to see the cities from a bird's eye view, realizing that there was a pattern to the attacks, being that he did not attack twice in the same place and the consecutive attacks were not carried out together. Therefore, after taking a point which had not yet been attacked, they decide to head towards that point, but the mayor quickly reveals that thanks to the fact that he was inside the city, that he clearly controlled it, he could teleport them to the point that they needed. Like this, that after Tomochika and Mokomoko reveal that they also had an ace up their sleeve, they teleport to the required point, and after writing what the next fall of one of the copies was going to be, they ran there quickly, and the protagonist used his ability to then activate Mokomoko's, which created an armored dome with a kind of bandages to protect them from the impact when they emerged intact. The protagonist realizes that a mysterious object that his partner has. So Mokomoko explains to him that it was something that achieved recently, being something that can be worn under the clothes, that has the spiritual power of the ghost and can be transformed into a coat or armor by adjusting the shape freely, in addition to having great resistance. After this they talk about the attack that managed to reach the copy, so now the rest should fall, and indeed this is how it happened. Mia did not understand why an immortal vampire could have died, to which Lain explains that she created only one copy and that same copy creates other clones. Therefore at the same time die one, all who were been made in the same way they would also die. Therefore now he would only have to make copies that were slightly different from each other. However, at that moment he felt like his main body in another dimension had just died without understanding exactly what he had done. Protagonist falling collapsed on the spot to be reduced to ashes, wondering if his plan to save someone would work with the city from the attacks. Calmed down, the protagonist's group decided to meet again with Ryota in a kind of castle very far from there. A young girl stood up from a species of a coffin with a pink stone on the chest, which, when she grabbed it, let her see a hologram of Lain, which revealed that her plan had been a success since she was able to die in exchange for the fact that the little girl survives. Then when they begin to explain to her identity, revealing that the little girl was in turn the vampire, since this was a copy made of her own body. However, she was also a different person who did not inherit any of her memories. She also explains that this was to avoid the attacks of the protagonist and Al. Hear your name quickly. The little girl reacted back to the citadel. The mayor thanked her for saving him. So after saying goodbye to them, Tomochika returned to the protagonist, who was inside a large armored vehicle which he had lent them to return the favor, and that is how he continued. On her trip at night, a samurai-like girl named Ryoko decapitated a gigantic beast that looked like a lion and gained a kind of experience that was shared between her and her friends, who were called Runa, Azua and Nina, and after this we see that they return to a kind of camp in which the samurai realizes that someone is inside her tent, and upon entering threateningly the ninja class is then when they have a conversation about the Chinese sword that she had lost her phone and Carol had entered the store to return it to her. However, the conversation continues and the ninja does not reveal that it was she who did not grab it with the intention of seeing the protagonist's monitoring tool, but she got Nothing, and since the cell phone was about to running out of battery decided turning it around. The conversation continued and finally we are told that Carol was an American ninja who had even prepared an exclusive satellite to follow the protagonist due to his powers. However, in that world it was totally useless. Out of nowhere an alarm begins to sound in the world phone, activating something called Alpha Omega and indicating that something called the first door had been opened far from the city in the mountains. The protagonist and her friends are heading towards the capital now on the new armored vehicle that they lent them in the city to facilitate them. The journey is so when we see I take a girl who is driving even though it seems like she doesn't know what she is doing, since it seems that she is really scared at having to travel on such dangerous roads due to the great possibility of detachment and falling that these have. So when the protagonist reproaches him that since he is the man, he had to be driving, however, he does not even answer him since he is sound asleep, as if he did not feel the danger at any time. Then when Mokomoko tells his teacher that the boy does not is awake, thing which surprises the young woman since she cannot understand how the protagonist is always so calm sleeping in such tense moments, just to get scared again when he puts his eyes on the road when he sees that in front of them there is a large rock blocking the way to the road. They are heading quickly and it seems like they are going to crash. Then when we see the protagonist who is dreaming and next to him his adoptive sister Saka, who seems to be the one who gave the name to the protagonist. After this they have a conversation where he teaches how to say hello, since it seemed that the little one I didn't know about these traditions, seeing that he really gets happy when he feels integrated for the first time. After this we see a large complex similar to a kind of laboratory in the middle of the mountain where Aaka turned out to be a very good worker. There she was talking about work with a boy named Yukio who congratulated her for a great performance and speed at work. However, more than making her happy, we see that these words bother the girl a little, who quickly tries to leave the place after having finished her work. However, the scientist, grabbing her by the shoulder, tells her that not yet he can leave and then asks her to come with him. The woman says that this place currently looks like a base for an evil organization. This makes the boy laugh a little and he can't explain what these facilities are that carry out experiments for the people of his society. When Asaka asks which one, it would be his job, Yukio answers that he would have the obligation to take care of the monster, which surprised the girl quite a bit since he doesn't seem to want to do it. The man continued explaining in that place that they were doing cursed experiments. The talk continued until they reached a long hallway illuminated with dim red lights that gave the place a rather sinister appearance. At first, the girl was a little hesitant towards the place they were going through, that bright hallway, to which the scientist replied that they were heading to their new workplace. After finishing the hallway, they arrived at a kind of very futuristic elevator and began to talk about something called the term Alpha Omega. At first, the girl did not understand very well what all this was about, and the man explained to her that it was the beginning and the end of the Greek alphabet and, in other words, it meant everything or eternity, thus being the code name of the test subject that she would have to take care of from now on. At this point, the only thing Asaka knew was that the test the scientist was talking about was a human being, but the man quickly responded that he has never seen it. So it would be totally impossible for him to be scared, since he doesn't understand how they can believe that she would take care of a monster of such danger. Yukio justifies it by saying that she has a license to be a teacher, so she will need it for this mission. Otherwise, if this situation continues, there is a possibility that humanity would become extinct at that moment, so he would have to give the monster a proper education. Aaka was fully aware of the boy's words, however, due to the terror that she possessed, she did not understand why she had to be the one to take care of such a monster, since there were many other people suitable for this type of thing. Yukio replied that there were more candidates than her, however, he chose her personally since he had a hunch about this. After arriving at the lowest part of the elevator and advancing through some corridors, they arrived at a large metal door, which seemed to be there to prevent the Alpha Omega creature from being able to escape and walk freely. Then, the scientist confessed that he does not have authorization to advance beyond that point, therefore, the rest of the path would have to be completed entirely by herself. After giving her an instruction sheet explaining everything she would need, he left, wishing her good luck. When she opened the door, a large stream of light was seen as it began to open up, letting us see, on the other side, a kind of different dimension, which was a large open-air field. So after checking her notes, she decided to move forward, arriving at a large wooden house in the middle of nowhere. After searching throughout the house, he finally found the room where the protagonist was. When he was little, he got very angry when he saw him because it seemed unacceptable to him that they kept a child locked up there in solitude. After taking him out of the house, the force asked the little boy to go play quickly. The boy raised his finger towards the girl, making her clearly scared, but at that moment the protagonist killed a kind of ghost that was hiding in the shadow of the woman. The little boy explained to her that it was a kind of demon that from time to time tried to kill him and that he did not care. They were bothered to play, but because it was getting dark soon, he asked him if he could do it. The next day, Saka replied to the little boy that he was absolutely right and that she had gotten too carried away. So, holding his hand, she helped him get up, and after introducing herself, she revealed that before arriving there, they called the protagonist Okaki. However, that was not important, since right now the truly essential thing was that he was hungry. At that moment, the girl's stomach also started to rumble, so she decided to cook something very delicious, just like any other woman would do. When she opened the refrigerator, she realized that there were all the ingredients she could imagine. However, she did not know how to cook. Meanwhile, she took a bath while rubbing herself with soap. This made Aka realize that she had to make something the little one could eat before he finished bathing. It was at that moment that, after opening a drawer, she saw there were instant noodles and quickly prepared them. At first, the little one was a little puzzled since he didn't know what it was, but when they tried it, they loved it. Aka thought that maybe she should call him the same way her mother did, so she asked him, but the boy didn't seem to know what she was talking about. So, she decided to leave the conversation aside and choose a name for herself, giving him the name Yogiri. After continuing the conversation, we returned to the point where the girl was teaching him the formalities of greeting. Back in the magical world, we see that the protagonist was still asleep, smiling. He was then woken up by the girl Tom, who, shaking him, informed him that they had reached a dead end due to a rock collapse. She complained that he had spent the entire trip asleep, to which he replied that he was tired since he used a large amount of his power in the city, leaving him exhausted. She began explaining her school of driving, the Dura, which could compete with things that were delayed here and there. In that strange way, the protagonist, who had not fallen asleep, asked why exactly they had to go to the royal capital, which angered the young woman, since she thought that she would. Not having that doubt, and at this point in the trip, they talked about their goal being to return to the world they were in, and to do so, they would have to contact Saikyou, the Wise One. However, if that was what they wanted to achieve, there could be another way to do it without having to go to the capital. Tomochika replied that perhaps he was right, but all his companions were heading that way, so the smartest thing to do so far would be to go back a little and look for another route. For now, as they began to reverse course, they ended up colliding with what looked like a dragon following them. The creature was quite large and, angrily, roared after receiving the hit from the vehicle. After this, it attacked them with great rage, but the protagonist, without much difficulty, managed to kill it. His frightened partner quickly warned him that a large flock of dragons was heading their way. This made the boy realize that they were definitely in enemy territory. The creatures approached in a group, carrying a strong breath of fire in their mouths. But before they could launch their attack, the protagonist ordered them all to die together. They did, and all of them fell as if they were mosquitoes in an insect repellent commercial. Feeling somewhat relieved for now, they thought they would be safe. However, they felt guilty for having entered dragon territory without knowing it. That's when a large shadow blocked the light, and a gigantic golden thunder dragon began heading toward them. This dragon seemed to be the leader of the flock of monsters. Tom, the girl, was really scared, since the creature could launch a powerful lightning bolt at any moment. However, the protagonist reassured them by telling them that he didn't feel any hostility from the dragon, and perhaps it was simply its appearance. A few seconds later, the great dragon flew away, seemingly scared after muttering a few words. Upon hearing this, the protagonist called out to him, asking him not to leave, since they could communicate in the same language, threatening that if the dragon disobeyed, it would suffer the same fate as the other dragons. The dragon quickly stopped its flight, and a few seconds later, it was revealed that the original form of this beast was actually that of a small blue-haired girl. She revealed that she only wanted to test if they were qualified to meet the sword master. However, seeing that they had no idea what she was referring to, the little girl explained to them that her master was in a gorge, and he was a man capable of granting them a gift. Despite all this talk, the protagonist replied that it had nothing to do with them, so they decisively began to leave. However, the girl confessed that her teacher had asked her to bring him some promising candidates, and that this man was someone who could rival a wise man. These words caught the attention of the protagonist and his friends because if he was someone so powerful, he might have the information they needed to return to their world. However, they couldn't afford to take a detour when they were already lost. Upon hearing this, the girl offered the protagonist a deal. She would explain the path to reach the royal capital in exchange for being accompanied to meet the sword master. She finally revealed that her name was Tila. Minutes later, they continued on the path she indicated until they arrived at a large group of people in the middle of the forest, who noticed their presence and were surprised to see that they had arrived in a car. Tom explained to Tila and the rest that everyone there was a swordsman aspiring to become the next master sword, and today was the day they would choose the next knight of the Divine King. Suddenly, one of the swordsmen, who didn't seem very friendly, informed them that although they had done well to get there, they were already disqualified. However, a deep voice surprised him, saying that the contest hadn't even started yet, so there was nothing to disqualify anyone for. Then, the sword master, Warabe, appeared before them. Everyone stood in admiration as he addressed them. The old man told them that because there were many applicants, they would have to fight each other until he told them to stop. If less than half of them were left within 10 minutes, everyone would fail. The protagonist, Ken, wasn't very interested and asked if he could leave, as he wasn't at all interested in the contest. However, the old man added another rule: if anyone escaped, everyone would fail. With the shout of "begin," the massacre started among the swordsmen, and chaos ensued. When a group tried to attack the protagonist, he was ready to kill them automatically, but a young man with blonde hair, armed with a shield sword, defended them, reproaching the rest for acting this way, as it would cause them to fail the test to determine if. That's all for today. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like. See you in the next video.